It was a bleak day, not just weather-wise. I was watching from a window that looked out upon the entrance of the courthouse as day one of the trial dawned. It was like waiting for the hearse to arrive at the graveside. The crowds had already begun to gather in front, some of them morbidly curious onlookers, some of them were protesters. A violence was brewing between those who were in support of Tabitha and those who wanted justice to be done quickly and efficiently. The toxic mixture of outrage and revolution was flowing through them. "Want to see her put on the performance of her life?" asked Lydia. I smiled at the idea. Even then, both of us expected Tabitha to arrive with airs and graces. I wanted to get a close observation, but as a witness, I had to be kept under lock and key with Lydia, who had been instructed by her superiors to accompany me at all times. I was glad to have her with me. At night in the hotel room I was contained in, my mind gave way to lonely thoughts. To my surprise, although there were many calling the boss lady a murdering psychopath and baying for her blood, there were so many others who still hailed her as some kind of hero. She was a hero to the people of the shanties for being bold enough to provide them with what they needed to survive. She was a hero to victims of sexual assault and violence, given her own story, and willingness to do whatever it took to open people's eyes to what was a huge problem in the shady city. That was no excuse, though. In the eyes of the law, two horrific crimes do not cancel each other out. She wasn't in the shanties anymore. She was in the hands of the lawmakers, and there she was seen as a monster. I was busy watching a woman screaming angrily. "Just take her out and hang her." She had a child of about 8 at her side doing the same thing. They could have been genuine, but there was something set up about those particular protesters. Something that didn't look quite right to me. Their clothing, positioning, banners and dialogue were all too neat. "Here she comes," said Lydia with a hand on my shoulder, pulling me from my thoughts. Cries of bloodlust rang out as the crowd pushed forward. Clang! Metal shuddered as someone outside hurled something heavy at the transport van. It caused Tabitha to jerk forward, feeling as though it would hit her on the head. She could hear the angry voices outside, although slightly muffled. They called her the slut of the shanties. They wanted to hang her. They wanted to burn her like a witch of old. Mob mentality had consumed them completely. More bangs against the wall sounded as the transport drove through the crowd to the entrance of the courthouse. Fists pounding against the sides. There was a splat as someone threw the rest of their latte at the narrow windows. She would never admit it to anyone, but Tabitha had never felt so alone. There was no one around to support her. No Penns, no aunts, not even Dennis. It had all come to being enclosed within a metal box. The rabble of hatred heightened, and the venom became more potent. Bang, bang, bang. The crowd had pursued the van to the door. "Get her out!" they chanted. "Get her out!" Tabitha wanted to remain within the metallic tomb, but the van shuddered to a halt. The two escorting bailiffs took their time from the slam of their doors to walk around the van and open up the back doors. Clank, twist, and suddenly the rabble became roars. As Tabitha's eyes adjusted to the light, she could see the sea of hatred she was cast into. Without saying a word, the bailiffs fetched her and pulled her onto her feet. She was dragged out of the van. They slapped at her, they pulled at her hair, they kicked at her. There was one among them deliberately keeping the crowd irate. It was he who threw the can. It hit Tabitha across her face, causing her to fall over. The bailiffs half-heartedly pushed the crowd back, but whilst they were lifting Tabitha onto her feet, another, feeling bold because of the rabble-rouser, ran at her and kicked her in the face. Before the violence of the crowd escalated further, the bailiffs finally rushed her inside to await her trial. It was a long and painful walk from CPD custody into the hands of the lawmakers. The wounds were not nursed. She wasn't even checked for damage. Judge Doyle wanted Tabitha to remember she was now in her domain. Many a broken spirit had entered the drafty, emotionless halls of the courthouse. Even more were broken before the bench of Judge Doyle. The question on my mind then was, how long would Tabitha's spirit stand under the scrutiny of the judge's icy gaze? Being unable to attend the trial personally, the following account is made up of the statements of those in attendance and court transcripts. The hall was awash with nervous energy as Tabitha's trial came to session. The only one who seemed unaffected by it was the lady herself, who sat on her bench as though ready to watch her production play out before her. Attendance: Judge Doyle presiding. City Prosecutor, Counsel for the Defendant Ronald Owen. Defendant Tabitha McKinney. Clerks and bailiffs. Clerk, all rise. Court is now in session. Judge Doyle presiding. In a flurry of black robes, the judge entered the room, and for a moment the slightest breath could be heard. Karen Doyle took her bench, her terribly scarred left eye and the wound on her neck on full display. Tabitha glared at her, but the judge didn't respond. The trial was opened under proper procedure. The charges were read. Embezzling city funds, inciting violence, murder in the second degree, murder in the first degree. Judge Doyle addressed the murder charges first. Judge Doyle: murder in the second degree of Mel Wallace, a clerk of this court. Mel had been the woman I had gotten the video of. Tabitha and Marcus Penn had taken her to Clifton Alley, running along the side of the club, and slit her throat. The video footage of this incident had been the final piece of evidence lawmakers needed to bring Tabitha in. It was second degree because the eldest Penn triplet had been the one to wield the killing blow. Judge Doyle: murder in the first degree of Rob and Linda McKinney, as well as Lynn Watson. Rob and Linda were Tabitha's parents. It had been Dennis who had told me of their demise at the hands of their daughter, as well as the nanny who had been put in charge of the wayward girl. The judge addressed Ronnie Owen as Tabitha's counsel. Judge Doyle: how did your client plead? Ronnie Owen: Ma'am, I would like to ask the court to allow us more time to prepare for this trial. There are extenuating circumstances and the client wants a proper defence. The city prosecutor stepped forward. The city prosecutor: Ma'am, the defendant was read her rights upon arrest. She was informed of all charges and my colleague has had ample time to prepare. Doyle addressed Ronnie. Judge Doyle: is your client ill-informed? Ronnie: no, ma'am, but on the charges of first-degree murder there was an investigation at the time. John Watson, husband of Lynn, confessed to the murder of Rob and Linda McKinney as well as Lynn Watson. Judge Doyle: the confession was revoked and further evidence found. There is no statute of limitations on those charges. Ronnie Owen: Ma'am, I call for a mistrial until I can be properly prepared for this new evidence. He tried. The man with the Owen name really did try. Doyle's lip curled. Judge Doyle: I suggest, counsellor, that you make your client aware that there are consequences for her actions. The charges stand. If you are underprepared, then you need to familiarise yourself with your client's case history. It seemed that Dennis had tried to navigate his way around CBD by telling them everything he knew about the death of Tabitha's parents, including where they were likely to find the remains. His testimony gave the lawmakers reason to add murder to Tabitha's charge sheet, potentially sending her away even longer. The coroner's report confirmed stab wounds. The nanny's husband was pardoned and released. He suddenly had a solid alibi for the night in question. Ronnie was not done. Ronnie Owen: as far as the charges are inciting violence, the so-called Freefall Massacre was not a massacre at all. It was declared a terrible drug-induced accident at the time. The Freefall Massacre occurred at the Beckingridge Tower just as the Knock Knock Club reopened. There were whispers of Tabitha being the cause of the deaths of 59 people. Judge Doyle: how did your client plead? Ronnie Owen: Your Honour, I do urge the court to approach this matter with a clear head. Judge Doyle unmoved: how did your client plead? Ronnie Owen: not guilty, ma'am, on all charges. Judge Doyle: return to your benches, counsellors, and we will begin. Both lawyers gave their opening statements. The city prosecutor, as expected, painted Tabitha as a monster. He described her as a spoiled, murderous, and lacking moral conscience. He asked the jury to consider that she didn't care for the people of the shanties the way she would have it seem. He asked the jury to consider the bodies she was responsible for, but not yet charged with. Ronnie called objection on this. The judge sustained. The trial was to be kept to the matters at hand. The city prosecutor mentioned my own part. He also discussed the death of Madeline and the statement I had given to the police at the time, discussing Tabitha having put the knife in Mary's hand, forcing me to defend myself against her. Throughout the statements, Tabitha kept her gaze forward. Doyle ignored her. During the city prosecutor's statement, she was whispering something to Ronnie. I found out later that she was asking, where the fuck did they find my Aunt Pa? In Ronnie's opening statement, he asked the jurors to keep an open mind. He urged them to remember the shelters, food programs, and support the Knock Knock Club provided. That wasn't the psycho bitch that did that, that was the Baroness, someone in the audience had called out. Doyle slammed the gavel down. The noise of its fury echoed. Judge Doyle: I will have no outbursts in my courtroom. Do that again, you will be removed. She turned to the sea of judging faces that were the jury. The jury will disregard that comment. Ronnie continued. He played the angle of desperation anyone who had been to the shanties would be familiar with. I wasn't sure how much the jury would buy the rags-to-hero standing for the little man story of Tabitha's. Even if he stood there all day explaining Tabitha's reasoning, what her aunt tried to do for her and those she had protected in her own sordid way, Her parents were still butchered, the Freefall Massacre had still happened, and the Mayor Phelps and his 17-year-old daughter Amber were still missing. This was all Tabitha's hand. The trial was going to be sticky. It was most curious to find out Chick Owen's thinking behind allowing his brother to defend her. It would have been so easy to put an Owen in there and watch her fall, but from what I could see, Ronnie was defending her to the best of his ability. Being kept in confinement at the time prevented me from calling on the Cappy to find out. And with that, Ronnie was pulling every lawyer trick he could, starting with a little public relations damage control. The trouble was, Tabitha was as guilty as sin. How long would the crowds outside calling her name stand in solidarity when the final hammer fell? A chilling breeze blew through the courtroom. There was no comfort to be found in the dungeon of mahogany benches. Even the thick wine-coloured curtains that hung over the windows offered little cheer. The boss lady herself watched from the defendant's bench like some wild animal in a zoo. There was anger in her grey eyes, that much was obvious, but there was something else there too. It was something deep-rooted. Fear, perhaps? Like most cornered animals, her first thoughts were escape. Attendance, Judge Doyle presiding. City prosecutor. Counsel for the defendant, Ronald Owen. Defendant, Tabitha McKinney. First witness, E.B. Clerks and bailiffs. City prosecutor. The city calls their first witness, ma'am. Judge Doyle urged him to continue. City prosecutor. We call Ernest Beckingridge to the stand. There was a shuffle from the benches and a murmur of voices as the middle-aged man with greying fair hair, dressed in a grey pinstripe suit, crossed the aisles and was first to step up to the witness stand. He had warm features, but grey bags underneath his eyes. He was a man who had seen a lot. His shoulders were hunched like he had the weight of the world on them. City prosecutor. Mr. Beckingridge, you are CEO of the Beckingridge financial firm, correct? Ernest Beckingridge. Yes, sir, that's correct. City prosecutor, can you please tell the court what happened the night of the Freefall benefit held at the Beckingridge Tower, City, Maine, in your own words? The prosecutor looked back at the jury and scanned their faces for reaction. Ernest looked to Tabitha. Ernest Beckingridge. My partner and I weren't in attendance. We were going to Lynn on an early flight the next morning. Ronnie stood and raised an objection. Ronnie Owen. Ma'am, I fail to see what relevance this witness testimony has when he wasn't there at the time. City prosecutor. The witness has a keen insight into what happened, not just on the events of the Freefall, but also what happened afterwards. Judge Doyle. Overruled. Mr. Beckingridge, you will answer the question. Ronnie sat back down as Ernest cleared his throat. He took a sip from the glass of water that had been provided for him. Ernest Beckingridge. I was awoken around 11 p.m. by my secretary Bernadette. She informed me that clients had been leaping from the top of the tower. City prosecutor. Did she explain as to why? Ernest Beckingridge. A number of years ago, an employee of the firm embezzled a large amount of money from the company. The case is still ongoing. We were lucky to have a new investor. They pulled us out of the water, as it were. The city prosecutor stroked his chin. City prosecutor. And these replenished accounts were the ones the defendant stole from? Ernest Beckingridge. Yes, sir. The prosecutor raised his voice so that it boomed across the hall. City prosecutor. Could you please tell the court who had been this guardian angel for the firm? Where had this rescue investment come from? Ernest Beckingridge. Owen Inc. We've got a great chance here, said Mr. Heath to his wife. Mrs. Heath agreed. It was a huge opportunity for them. It was one of the biggest investment accounts they had ever handled, but her mind had been elsewhere. Have you heard from Taylor? She asked. Their son, a 21-year-old finance student at Felton University, was supposed to be coming home to their City Main apartment for the weekend, but he never turned up that afternoon. They had tried contacting him, but received no response. He's a man now, Mr. Heath reminded. He's probably gone off with his friends for the weekend instead. But it's not like him not to call and let us know, replied she. Mr. Heath glared at his wife. She was thinking of checking her phone again. This is the 5th time, he barked. He was counting. Mrs. Heath reached into the low-end design clutch bag she carried, encrusted with real diamonds, and removed a silver device. Still no notifications. Albert is waiting at home for him in case he turns up. He will be fine, assured Mr. Heath. What his wife didn't know was that Taylor and some of his uni friends had been tasked with couriering some poor-quality heroin into the shanties. Needles, they called it locally, because it was mostly injected. Mr. Heath was beginning to think Taylor and his friends hadn't taken the proper precautions. Their instructions had been to wear old clothing, not to wear jewellery or carry expensive items, and speak to no one but their contact. Mr. Heath didn't like involving his son, but a group of youngsters could blend in better at Kirkton Apartments, where the exchange was to take place, than a businessman from the city would. Besides, one day Taylor would take over his father's business, so he had to learn all aspects of it. Taylor was no stranger to it anyway. He had been an effective courier since the age of 12. He enjoyed the money, and unlike many of his peers, he didn't have everything handed to him. He had to take on his share of the work. He earned his lifestyle, and at great risk sometimes. Taylor Heath was not pampered through life. No, siree. Still, the shanties were dangerous. It had been the first time Taylor and his friends had taken goods that far south. It was also where the call for needles was highest. The people of the shanties didn't want to escape the poverty trap. They wanted to hide themselves and lie in it. But they had bigger concerns. They had brought in Lynette Fullerton, of the Fullerton Bridge and Construction Company that handled the biggest projects across the city. A stern old bitch with a real nasty bite, Mr. Heath observed, but with enough money to make life very, very sweet indeed. There was also a Joshua Colby, new money. A young man was a software developer, and his apps and game designs went big. He made more money than he'd ever seen in his life. More money than he could handle, suggested Mrs. Heath. That's where the husband and wife team came in. They would be able to help him manage such a big fortune. Fullerton Construction had set sights on low-cost projects in the shanties that would brighten the area, make it a cleaner area rather than a den of thieves and whores. It had to be done before in Swanton. The Chamberlain Docks still belonged to prostitutes and traffickers at night, but during the day there was a buzz in the place, and the fashionable walked the streets. Lynette had all but made the final arrangements for the rejuvenations when a better offer was made to her. It had come from an own ink associate. They told her they had opened an investment with Beckingridge. Lynette would have much preferred hearing from Chick Owen directly, but she trusted the name enough. She pulled the contracts in the shanties, and the Heaths were tasked with closing the deal. Tabitha stood watching over the meeting. They were losing the support of Lynette Fullerton. Your family brought the city together. They built bridges, Mrs. Fullerton. We would love for you to be part of connecting the north and the south, Mr. Heath was saying, linking his fingers together to demonstrate his point. Fullerton was still sneering at having had no word from the Cappy directly. Now it was Mrs. Heath who was making the plea. All the way to City Hall there have been cries to rejuvenate the south. On his campaign trail, Mayor Phelps had made great strides in showing what improvements it could make to the poorest in the city. However, this investment account with Owen Inc. will stand Fullerton in a much better position in the future. Lynette scoffed. Mrs. Heath bit her lip. She probably shouldn't have brought politics into it. She chastised herself. How likely was it that Fullerton was a Phelps supporter anyway? Joshua took over. I can see what you're trying to do, he said thankfully. The Fullerton Bridge worked wonders for the Cardine area and made us part of the Colford community. Mr. Heath beamed. Yes, and we could do the same again. We could be at the forefront of a new modern Colford. The door to the balcony opened briefly, allowing loud music and screams to enter briefly. The meeting downstairs continued uninterrupted. The door had closed again as quickly as it opened. Tabitha rolled her eyes. What a fucking cunt, she said, referring to Mr. Heath. Reggie Penn crossed the overpass carrying a woman over his shoulder. Drugged, drunk, probably both. She was one of the Beckingridge firm workers from the party upstairs. Reggie's skin was ghoulishly pale in the low light compared to Tabitha's darker complexion. It's going to break, he said. Tabitha raised an eyebrow. I bet you it doesn't. Reggie looked down at the meeting below. Drink says it does. Tabitha smiled. You're on. Reggie carried the woman to the ledge and launched her over the side. She plummeted down and crashed onto the table. Huh, Reggie shrugged. The table didn't break. Told you, replied Tabitha. No cheapo shit in here. It's reinforced. Meanwhile, downstairs, shock had captured the meeting as the four stared at the body. What, Mr. Heath recognised her. She was one of the client support team. They assumed she had gotten too drunk and accidentally fell from the overpass. I'll call an ambulance, said Mrs. Heath. All Mr. Heath could think of was they still had to close their deal. Well, hello, cunts. The meeting was interrupted once again. A young woman, probably in her early 20s, had entered from the upper floor. She was wearing a red dress and grinning at them with a gap-toothed smile that seemed more chilling in its whimsy. What's going on here? Mr. Heath demanded to know. Tabitha looked at the body of the client support girl. I'd say it looks like you're fucked. All four of you. She turned to Joshua Colby. Well, except maybe you. I actually kinda like you. I'm calling the police, Lynette announced. Oh, shut your cunt face, you fucking troll, Tabitha growled. Mr. Heath raged. He charged across the room to the girl. He drew himself closer to her, but she was not intimidated. Instead, she wrinkled her nose. Jesus fucking Christ, she said. What have you sprayed yourself with? Mr. Heath growled. You're dealing with a very dangerous man here, Tabitha chuckled. Is that so? You're done, Mr. Heath yelled. You're done. Before he could strike Tabitha, there was a firm grip in his hair. Tugging at the roots, and his head was pulled back so sharply pain fired through the muscles of his neck. He had made an insurance claim for whiplash before. It seemed that this was actually what it felt like. Who's done? Asked Reggie, scowling at him. I was just getting started, commented Tabitha, matter-of-factly, and he's killing my fucking groove. Mr. Heath began to sob. He lost care of looking like he was in control for the sake of his wife and clients. Beckingridge was so large and vast it was unlikely anyone could hear him. Please, he begged. What do you want? Tabitha shook her head at Reggie. She opened her arms and shrugged, and now he fucking asks. Reggie laughed. He flicked Mr. Heath's bottom lip. Blah 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 blah. Help me, imitated the youngest triplet in a high-pitched voice. Tabitha turned to the others at the table. You may want to listen up, because I've got my own pitch to give. Still with a firm grip of his hair, Reggie led Mr. Heath back to the spot at the table. Lynette recognised Reggie as one of Reginald Penn's triplets, but she wasn't sure which one. Not that it really mattered. She had had dealings with the Penns before, or at least her son did. Frankie was leading the Fullerton construction team, and they had just bought a prime piece of land in the north of Coldridge Park. It was the same area of the Folds building within which the Penns lived and the penthouse looked onto. That's a shame, Rita, the mother, had mused when she saw the construction signs go up. I really liked that part of the park. It was always kept so nice and so lovely in the spring. The beautiful garden she had started a committee to plant was to be bulldozed over to make way for industrial units. Reginald wouldn't stand for Rita looking on to grey buildings that would no doubt lie empty for some time, attracting the artist youth and their spray cans. He wouldn't have her beautiful view from the top of the city spoiled. She had planted those gardens as memorials for the youths in the city, men who had been cast out without any family. She didn't want those kids to be forgotten. She would keep her gardens. Reginald approached Frankie with requests to move on, but he refused. The equipment was brought in. The area was blocked off. Reginald made another bid for him to move on, but the Fullerton blood was thick and stubborn. Frankie still refused. Then, the day before construction was to begin, the fences, signs and pop-up office was taken down. By noon that day, it was as though Fullerton construction had never been there. Lynette received a call from Frankie's wife, Hannah. He had been taken to Colford General Hospital. His right hand was missing. He said it had been an industrial accident, but Lynette knew that wasn't true. You may want to take a seat, Tabitha urged. I'm heading this meeting now. The table was set. Who are you? Asked Lynette. I'm just a simple girl who wants to make you a counter-offer. You see, the so-called big investment these fucktards are talking about is a crock of shit. It would raise property prices in the air, but in doing so, put thousands of people out of a home. The houses would become unaffordable for the poorest like they did in Swanton. Where else are they going to go? Put the money back into the shanties now. We could benefit everyone, suggested Joshua. He was trembling, but he tried to remain focused. He spoke to the boss lady, but kept his eye on Reggie Penn, who was now pushing Mr. Heath into his chair so forcibly his head was almost on his lap. Either you splash the cash or give your life. You cannot threaten us, Lynette sneered. Who's threatening? Tabitha asked. She turned to Reggie. Did you hear me threaten anyone? Reggie shrugged his shoulders with a smile. I don't threat. I make promises, and I promised the good people of the shanties I would bring them compensation. She sharpened her attention on Lynette. Did you know that your granddaughter is befriending girls in my neck of the woods and coercing them into starring in porn films? You will pay for the lives that you and your leg have ruined one way or another. You could say I'm collecting for charity. I'm just happen to be a little aggressive in my fundraising. Why would we give anything to you? Get out of here, Bart, Lynette. Reggie snarled at the construction heiress, but Tabitha shook her head, signalling for him to take no action. He kept his eye on Lynette, but he was patting Mr. Heath's head and stroking his hair so roughly he was pushing his head into his lap again. It's a pity this place is so damn big you can't hear what's going on upstairs. The party? Mr. Heath thought. Did those upstairs get started on the closing deal festivities already? Did they know what was happening? He had heard some music earlier and raised voices, but it was a party. That was to be expected. As their captor said, Beckingridge Tower was large, and a company on such a grand scale needed their walls thick enough and ceilings high enough so that no one could overhear the decisions that were being made in the room that affected millions of lives. Roger produced a phone from his back pocket and threw it across to Tabitha, who caught it in her well-manicured talons. She pushed the buttons and switched on the loudspeaker. The ring echoed around the hall, much like being caught inside a church bell. Ring, it rattled. Ring, ring. All eyes were on Tabitha. Even Mr. Heath, who Reggie had allowed to straighten his back up, but had warmed his fingers around the locks of his hair so that his head would be held in place. "Hello, Marcus." Cold voice, absent of emotion, came through the speaker. "Hello, honey," Tabitha said, as though we're having a pleasant conversation elsewhere. "How are you?" "Fine," was the eldest triplet's cool reply. Things were not fine. Men, women, colleagues of the Heaths were screaming and crying out. Above the music they could hear a woman's gargling shriek that sounded as though she was being gutted. "Marcus, handsome, negotiations here are starting to get a bit sticky. Could you show these people exactly how fucking serious I am?" "Alright, take a look out the window there and you will see what your other option is," said Tabitha to the group. This time, as mighty as the Beckingridge Tower stood, screams could be heard as bodies fell past from the upper floor of the penthouse suite. A wave of confusion washed over the meeting room. They found it difficult to believe what their own eyes had just shown them. "So," Tabitha asked, "what's it to be?" Bodies rained from the tower that day. The rich elite of the city were given a choice. Their lives or their money. Most chose to go broke. "Maybe having nothing will teach them a bit of humility," Tabitha had said at the time, which was an ironic statement from one of the most egotistical people I've ever met. "Well, there's some chicks that won't bounce," said Reggie with a sardonic grin. "Allow me to offer some rational thinking at this point. Most of those affected by the massacre and the closure of the investment account were owners of corporations and large firms. It was this shock wave Tabitha had been hoping for. She wanted to hit on ink where it would feel it the most. As for the 59 victims who lost their lives, well, that was for the court to decide. No charges were brought at the time against Tabitha because she wasn't in the same room. The Penns avoided arrest because the team they had brought with them served witness that the party was drug and alcohol fueled and things got out of hand. Toxicology reports confirmed this. No one who survived dared point the finger. The police couldn't do anything because no physical coercion could be proven. Forensic accountants couldn't do anything because the funds that had been taken were officially registered as charitable donations. Quickly following the Freefall Massacre were the attacks on Judge Doyle. 3 times they tried to kill her. They cut the brakes of her car and watched as it rolled into the lake. She didn't drown. She crawled back out of the lake and still she stood. An assault in the city main as she left her offices slit her throat, but she managed to escape, seek help, and still she stood. Finally they tried to catch her on a car bomb. The explosion detonated as expected. They managed to take her eye, but the judge lived. After all was said and done, still she stood. The newspapers at the time reported on the assaults. They started to refer to her as the unkillable Judge Doyle. And so, with a political candidate in Mayerfelds and the Beckingridge firm at heel, Tabitha had a vice-like grip on the city. But politics are dirty, and the Beckingridge Tower could fall in so many different directions. Enter an iron judge to remind the boss lady just how the rules were made.